Hello everyone, and welcome to the Tome of Silver, the show where I randomly select a game from my collection, review it, and add it to an ever-growing ranking list. Bionicle is a series that, conceptually, lends itself remarkably well to a party-based role-playing game. With each Toa having their own unique weapon, element, and mask power, there's tons of potential to create a combat system using their various abilities. Not to mention Bionicle's naturally fascinating world and characters would make for a fantastic explorable setting. Well, in 2005, Bionicle fans would finally get an RPG, with Bionicle Maze of Shadows, developed by Razorback Developments and released exclusively on the Gameboy Advance. Did this game achieve that potential, or did it fail to put together the pieces? Put on your mask, ready your weapon, and let's turn the page to Bionicle Maze of Shadows for the Gameboy Advance. The story of Bionicle Maze of Shadows is actually based on the 6th Bionicle Adventures novel of the same name, and featured the team of Toa from the 2004 line, the Toa Metru. Prior to the events of Maze of Shadows, the Toa Metru had temporarily defeated the series' big bad, Makuta. However, the inhabitants of the island of Mata Nui, the Matoran, had been left in stasis, trapped in an eternal slumber within Matoran spheres. The Toa Metru ventured to find a safe place to bring the Matoran, eventually finding the island of Mata Nui. Deciding Mata Nui would be their new home, the Toa Metru attempt to return to Mata Nui and retrieve the Matoran, deciding to take an underground path to get there, which is where Maze of Shadows' story begins proper. As the Toa venture through the underground path, they are attacked by mutant Rahi, and Nokama, the Toa of Water, is mortally poisoned. The group is approached by Karzani, a sentient plant created by Makuta, who offers them a deal. Karzani desires revenge against Makuta for abandoning it, and requires a substance called energized protodermis to become more powerful. In exchange for the protodermis, Karzani will heal Nokama of her affliction. The Toa reluctantly agree, and Karzani provides a temporary antidote to Nokama. Determined to save their friend, the Toa begin their venture underground into the Maze of Shadows. The game's story is very light. After the opening, there's very little in terms of cutscenes and character interaction, which I found very disappointing. I did find it cool that they decided to base a game on one of the novels, and I would have loved a series of video games based on each book, with multiple games that each have a tightly focused plot and new setting detailing the Toa's adventures. Unfortunately, Maze of Shadows was the only one we got, and it's one with very little intrigue. Even if the actual narrative surrounding Maze of Shadows is minimal, the Toa Metru themselves were always interesting and fleshed out characters. The void left by the story could be filled through the team interacting with each other, giving us new insight into them or having them discuss the various mysteries of the maze. Sadly, we get nothing of the sort. It's clear the developers' priority leaned more heavily toward the gameplay, so let's switch gears. Maze of Shadows consists primarily of two different playstyles, dungeon crawling and turn-based combat. The maze part of the title is definitely the right word. The underground labyrinth is divided into 6 regions, and each region has a number of sections that the player will have to navigate and solve puzzles using their Toa's various abilities. When you first enter an area, you'll be met with multiple winding hallways, with numerous locked doors strewn about. These doors can be opened by performing various tasks. These tasks can include hitting far-off switches with throwing discs, or making use of the Toa's mask powers, such as using Nuju's telekinesis to move objects onto buttons, or Wanua's night vision to enter dark shrouds of fog. Completing these various activities and slowly opening up more and more of a given area was decently gratifying, and I was especially happy with how the developers made use of each of the Toa's given abilities outside of combat. Unfortunately, each Toa's powers are only ever really used for one task. Obtaining door codes is the only use for Nokama's Mask of Translation, and jumping over large gaps is the only use for Matao's Mask of Flight. This means often performing the same select few tasks repeatedly, which started to wear out its welcome over the course of the game's 12-hour or so playtime. I wish they got a bit more creative with the various uses of the Toa's powers, or at least included one other puzzle for each Toa to stave off the repetitiveness. I also think the game could have benefited from providing a map, where more of the map reveals itself as you explore. While not a problem in the early game due to how small each area starts, as you progress further, each section becomes more extensive. and with the amount of moving back and forth throughout the winding pathways, it is possible to get lost. It doesn't help that most of the hallways look identical to one another, with very little in the way of landmarks to be used as a reference point. The areas never became so massive that I would get hopelessly lost for minutes on end, but a map would have been helpful to get my bearings for the odd time I lost track of where I was. As you go about completing puzzles, you'll encounter Rahi lurking around each corner, and will give chase once they see you. Making contact with the Rahi will force you into battle, and here's where we talk about the game's combat. In battle, you have several means of going about defeating your foe. First are discs, which can be thrown at an enemy. While your selection of discs will be very limited when you first start, as you explore further into the maze or defeat enemies, you'll progressively get more, each having unique properties, such as having a chance to freeze the foe, temporarily lower their defense, etc. Discs are shared between all characters. Meanwhile, each Toa has several abilities unique to them, in the form of their mask and tools, which can either deal massive damage or provide various buffs, such as Vakama's invisibility increasing his defense, or Anua's night vision allowing for a higher chance of critical hits. As your characters level up, you'll progressively get more abilities to aid you in battle. I was pleasantly surprised with how the Toa's various powers were implemented, providing a wide selection that all felt true to the characters, and unlocking that next skill in the Toa's repertoire was both exciting and rewarding. Most importantly, they were varied enough that each Toa felt distinct from one another. I never felt like one member of the party worked identically to another, which did a great job of keeping things fun and interesting as you played around with each character. Discs, masks, and tools can only be used a limited number of times, and running out of all three will leave a character completely useless in battle. These can only be restored by leveling up your character, using your precious consumable items, or by finding these uncommon one-of-a-time use restore points, so you need to be mindful of each ability's remaining use. I don't like the idea of possibly running out of attacks entirely and being left completely defenseless. I think the game should have had at least one really weak attack with unlimited uses for each Toa, that you can use for particularly desperate situations. That said, in any of the playthroughs I've done for Maze of Shadows, not once was I ever put in that position. The game gives a surplus of items to restore your points for your disc and abilities, and even though each restore point can only be used once per playthrough, they were divided out well enough that this never really became an issue. Each of your Toa and the various Rahi you encounter has a particular element attributed to them. Each element is strong and weak against a particular type. Fire is strong against ice is strong against earth against stone against air against water, and water against fire. Thankfully, you can switch to any Toa during your turn, so you'll never be stuck fighting a disadvantageous battle by starting a fight with the wrong Toa. Another excellent feature is the inclusion of the Rahi Chronicle. After you fight a Rahi once, the Rahi will be added to your Rahi Chronicle, which can be viewed at any time while in combat, showing you their various attacks and their element. This was a very welcome inclusion. If I ever forgot what element an enemy was, it just took a few moments to refresh myself with the Chronicle, rather than needing to try and attack with every Toa to see what they're weak to all over again. Speaking of the Rahi, I was very impressed with the variety of them spread throughout the game, with over 25 different Rahi in total. These Rahi were all taken from various sets and comics throughout the early years of Bionicle, and it's really cool seeing all these relatively less appreciated sets be fully animated and brought to life. There were a few Rahi here that I didn't recognize, and I like to think of myself as being pretty familiar with most every Bionicle set released. If these enemies were original designs created exclusively for the game, then hats off to the developers, as they felt right at home alongside the rest of the existing Rahi. Presentation-wise, Maze of Shadows looks good. The overworld has a good amount of detail, but I did find that because there isn't much in terms of unique landmarks in each area, places quickly started looking pretty samey, but there was enough aesthetic changes in the various regions to prevent complete visual fatigue. In combat, the sprite work for Toa and Rahi are made to resemble 3D models, and I was blown away with how much detail was put into the individual parts that make up each set. It felt really faithful to the original toys. The effects for special moves did look a little bad, mostly because they're in such a different style from the characters that they just stick out like a sore thumb, but it was never enough to completely bring me out of the experience. Honestly, the only place where the visuals really suffer are the cutscenes, few though they were. The characters are barely animated. Nokama, after being poisoned, looks like she just passed out after having one too many drinks at the Toa Rager. Also, I really don't like the way the Toa look in these scenes. Their heads are so much larger than their bodies, making them resemble bobbleheads, and the way these portraits are put together really don't do the Toa any favors. Nokama, again, gets the worst of it, with her mask giving her these bug eyes, and the shape of her mask looking like she's perpetually screaming. So from what I've described, Maze of Shadows had the makings of a perfectly good, but not amazing, RPG for the Game Boy. And for the first little while, I was having a decent time. Sure, I couldn't help but be disappointed about what I viewed as missed potential regarding the story, characters, and setting, but the gameplay was fun enough. I enjoyed navigating the maze, and the combat offered a good time with how it made use of the Toa's abilities. I wasn't finding the game particularly difficult. Sure, a Toa would go down every now and again, but I was usually showered with enough healing supplies that these occasional losses were hardly anything more than minor setbacks. However, as I entered combat more often, I started to notice that both my attacks had a chance to miss, and enemies had a chance to dodge my attacks. I still don't know what the odds are of an enemy dodging, or what the difference was between that and my attacks missing on their own. All I knew was that the game went out of its way to distinguish the two, and made it clear there were two ways for my attacks not to land. I then had an encounter where my attacks struggled to hit, with usually only one of every 4 of my attacks landing. It was frustrating, but I got through it. I then encountered another enemy, and had the same issue. My attacks just kept whiffing. This would be to the next encounter, and then the next encounter, and then the one after that. And I found that sense of enjoyment I was once having quickly turning into irritation. I began dreading combat, with each battle stretching longer and longer as I struggled to land my most basic of abilities. There were some discs that mitigate this issue. Kometsu discs have the added ability that they couldn't be dodged, but this disc can only be used 10 times before needing to be restored. Not to mention that while enemies can't dodge it, the disc can still just outright miss, and it did. There is also an enlarged disc, which, once it lands, the enemy temporarily becomes easier to hit, but in exchange for the Rahi stats becoming higher. I never wanted to use this disc because it made enemies hit harder, and even still, the enlarged disc still has a chance of missing or being dodged, which it did. This didn't make the combat any more challenging, it just made it agitating. It's not as though the enemies were tough and I needed to carefully plan out my best method of attack. Instead, I just need to keep selecting the same move over and over, watching my character's health slowly dwindle because a large portion of attacks I threw out just didn't land without any practical way of mitigating it. That's not challenge, that's god-awful design.
I fired again, and then I missed, and then I fired, and then I fired, and I missed. I missed both times, and then I fired, and I missed. This went on for several hours, and then I fired, and then I missed.
And then I was out of bullets, and then I got sad.
Yeah.
I had a popsicle, and then I passed out in the snow.
And then I woke up, and then I reloaded, and then I fired, and then I missed.
And unfortunately, this continued for almost the entirety of my playthrough. I had nothing but venom for the combat, and while the dungeon crawling remained fine, I'd seen the same puzzles so many times that they had quickly lost their luster. And because there was basically no story to speak of, there was nothing driving me to push forward. All that awaited around each corner was more of the same. There wasn't even much in the way of boss fights, with there only being 3 total, but given how difficult it became to land a hit, perhaps it was for the best there were minimal enemies with 3 times the health. But when I reached the final third of the game, the strangest thing happened. My attacks started landing far more consistently. Sure, there was still the occasional frustrating fight, but it happened far less often. Then I actually started having fun again. I wasn't rolling my eyes every time I got into combat, and because of my change in mood, I was able to appreciate the game's mechanics far more than I had before. This increase in accuracy lasted the rest of the game, so it didn't feel like a fluke. But even now, I have no idea what caused this change. Was my accuracy better because my characters had reached a certain level? Was I truly just getting ludicrously unlucky with every fight in the first 66% of the game? I wish I knew, but the issue that was plaguing me was gone, and I was finally seeing what the game was supposed to be. It didn't make the game incredible by any means, absolutely not, but I could say that I was having fun. Unfortunately, the damage was already done. The majority of my time with Maze of Shadows was so miserable, and even if things got better near the end, how could I possibly recommend a game where one's enjoyment is entirely dependent on the roll of a weighted die? Bionicle Maze of Shadows is probably the most underwhelmed I've been with a game thus far in the Tome of Silver. As I said, Bionicle is something that I feel lends itself so perfectly to an RPG format. And there are aspects here that scratch that potential, but it's just never enough. The story is unremarkable, and the dungeon crawling wears out its welcome due to just how repetitive it is. The best part about this game is its combat mechanics, but only if the accuracy of your attacks remains in your favor. Bionicle Maze of Shadows will drop down to the number 32 spot in our ranking, amusingly falling just under Bionicle the game. Both have brief moments of entertainment, but as sure as it was, Bionicle the game never made me frustrated or want to put the game down, so I don't think I could put Maze of Shadows any higher. To those of you who have played Maze of Shadows, did you enjoy your time with it, or did you have similar issues as me? With how luck dependent the game felt, I would be genuinely interested to hear if someone just had an all-around better experience than I did. I'll admit, I'm a bit nervous for my next video, as it's going to be one in a genre that I think a large portion of my audience won't really have a whole lot of interest in. But I've committed to selecting each game randomly, so I'm going to make sure I follow through no matter what is chosen. Guess we'll just see how it goes. In the meanwhile, thank you all so much for watching. Take care, and may we see each other again when we turn to the next chapter in the Tome of Silver.